Okay, component 4, the effective and reflective practitioner highlights understanding of assessment and assessment practices to plan for positively impacting student learning. The portfolio information is gathered from many sources. It's gathered from demonstrating practices with a class of students, your evidence of collaboration with families, community, and colleagues, and the candidate's contributions to learning communities to advance student growth. This is a holistic assessment diagram. I like to bring this up because generally when teachers start thinking of assessment, we go right to student achievement. But National Board and the reflective process has us think about all the things that go into our work as professionals. And this chart shows us all the ways we assess students, even though we're not thinking about it all the time. We're doing this work. So we assess students' perceptions with student surveys and the anecdotal notes we take and the information we get from parent conferences. We're, as teachers, we're always collecting quantitative and qualitative data. So this is an important way to think, shift your thinking, because generally when I talk to people about this, they start naming skills assessments and benchmarks, which is great because that does drive student learning. You do drive student learning with formative assessments, portfolios, and writing and rubrics. But how are you assessing your students holistically? For their demographics, are you thinking about their culture? Do you do culture quilts with your students at the beginning of the year so you can learn how to assess their culture and include their culture in the design of your units? Are you thinking about their multiple intelligences and who's a naturalist in my class? So I decided, since I had 10 naturalists in my class, I'm going to have an outdoor garden this year and teach multiplication arrays by the rows we make in the garden. So you're thinking holistically. And then programs. Who in my class is in special education? Who's gifted? Who needs support? You know, I'm thinking about the whole child and how I'll meet their needs. I'm not just planning instruction based on achievement. I'm planning it based on the personalized individual nature of all my kids. Jessica, do you want to talk about the architecture of accomplished teaching Helix and how that goes into that work too?
Sure. So component 4, we just have to remember, I know when you start to read those instructions, you're trying to just answer the questions, right? Or at least that was me. I just wanted to find the answers. What are they asking me? I need to find the answer. But we need to remember to go back to those source documents. And the architecture is one of those source documents that you'll use in every component, from C1, the test, 2, 3, and component 4. And when we look at the architecture, just really briefly, there is also on the note catcher attached an architecture if you'd like to see it bigger for yourself. There are also different variations of the architecture which are attached to that note catcher. So we're not going to go into this for a long time, but we always want to bring you back to it because it is a thread that weaves through every component and every certificate area. So no matter where you are in this process, no matter which components you're doing now or considering, this is going to be a big piece that you need. So first, we have to get to know our students. And just like Heavenly said, there are multiple ways to do that. So that's step 1 right away. Your students, who are they? How do we find that out? An assessment. An assessment doesn't have to be that word that we have PD on, and then they put all your numbers on a screen and they're green and red and everyone kind of goes, oh, but it's a pandemic, and you start thinking about all these excuses. Assessment can be a perfectly fine and happy word too. And it's just getting to know those students in various ways. It doesn't have to be big and formal. It can just be those everyday noticings that you have. And so once you know about your students, then this cycle really can begin. You have to set high and worthwhile goals for them. That's the second step. We can't set accurate goals if we don't know where our students are. And that can be physically, emotionally, academically, all of those things. Then we have to implement instruction specifically designed to attain those goals. That's the beauty of teaching. Every class period I have, and I'm now teaching middle school, I teach 3 sections of 6th grade. The way I teach those 3 sections is different. It might be the same lesson, but my strategies change multiple times a day. I think we just kind of organically do that. Each group has a little different personality. Then we have to evaluate learning, and this is where assessment comes back in. You might be jumping back and forth between teaching and assessment multiple times during a lesson. You might have a formative assessment thrown in there. You might throw a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. How are we feeling about this? All of that back and forth and that formative is not only part of the architecture, but start thinking about how might you record and collect those things to provide as evidence that you could perhaps use in your component 4. And then we look at that data, whether it be right in front of us and make a 10-second decision, whether it be how many cameras are on and we're looking on a Zoom screen, how many kids respond in the chat. We're reflecting on that quick assessment or that big chapter unit test. And we're looking at that data that we just gathered and making a decision. We called it in Arizona, lather, rinse, repeat, right? It's this cycle, it doesn't end. Then you go to step 6. Okay, now that I know what I know, maybe my goal still holds. Maybe we've accomplished this goal and I need a new one. Maybe I need to pause, time out, back up and try again. Okay, so there's all kinds of ways that the architecture has assessment and collaboration and professional learning embedded right within it. So we'll get into that collaboration piece a little more in a few minutes, but for now, we're going to stick with assessment just for a little bit longer.
So just want to apologize. I think, speaking of collaborating, I don't think my internet and I are collaborating well right now. So sorry I got kicked out there. I'm back.
Glad you're back. Glad you're back. So we have an activity that we plan for you. We want you to think about the architecture of accomplished teaching and answer these questions. Which step in the AAT does this component highlight? And how does the evidence you submit demonstrate this? So you're thinking about that helix of things. And you know when you're teaching, it's like you're managing a helix, or it seems like a tornado, or just things are always churning and always happening. But as we think about what Jessica just outlined as an effective and reflective practitioner, which step does this component highlight in that helix? And how does the evidence you submit demonstrate this? So I want you to respond in the chat, and we're going to take a look at some of your responses. This is the kind of reflection you have to do in the national board process. And the thing that I did so wrong, and I'm going to give you a hint, it took me longer than the average person to get certified. It took me 3 years. And when I did the components in the old way, when we had 15 different components. So I did something that I missed something I should have done. I should have read my rubrics, and not just read the rubrics and read the standards, but internalize them and connect them with what I do in my classroom. Now that I go back and look at them, it just seems so obvious, but that we should read our standards or download. And if you're a paper person, print them and highlight them if you need to do it. I had to make a binder and take these things out and really look at them, because when you internalize it, you begin to say, oh, I do that. I do these things. Let me document what I do and not look for something outside of myself and my practice, but hone in and reflect on how to make the things I already do better. So I know we're looking at a lot of different certificate areas when you guys introduced yourselves in the chat. But at the end of the day, the Helix, the architecture of accomplished teaching, applies to everybody. At the end of the day, the 5 core propositions apply to everybody, and they are a piece of each of your components. They are a piece of each of your standards. So I am able to do candidate support for anyone because the first thing I do is read your standards and internalize them. So I just want you to make sure you don't make heavenly mistakes. Foolish. I didn't read and internalize them. So I had to keep going a little longer, and that's okay because you don't fail National Board. Right. You don't fail. You're accomplished just because for the effort you put into it. And I hear people say that I pass, fail. It's not a passing fail thing, it's a journey.
Yeah, I love what you said, Heavenly, too, about this is work you are already doing. I think the thing that appealed to me the most about National Board, I had gotten a master's degree and I was it was year 13 for me. I remember it distinctly. And I was kind of at the point where, is this really what I want to do forever? Or do I just need to step away from this profession entirely? Like I kind of had this like mid-career crisis thing, but it was truly, the thing I loved about it is it gave me, I don't know, permission to really reflect on what I was doing. This wasn't like grad school where I'm reading these articles and creating summaries and taking tests, and not that that's bad or that's not a place for that, but I felt like every moment I spent working on this process really was helping my students and really was helping me become better at a profession I love, and so it was, no matter how long it takes you, that awakening, you will think differently about everything you do after attending this webinar or attending all of the others, or anything like that. It just changes your view of how you do these things. And that architecture is really at the heart of what all of us do every day. And so I think exactly like what you said, you're doing all this. It's just now putting it together in a format to explain that to someone else, right? And that's the part where people go, I begged, like, could I just be interviewed by someone? Can I fly somewhere and just tell them all the wonderful things I'm doing? Getting it down in that concise writing. And that's actually next week, we're really going to focus on how do you write for this, because I am a person who is not a strong writer in general. Like I just struggle with that. But when it came to this, I didn't have enough pages. What, 13 pages? Can I have 25 pages? For some reason, I write 13-page subplans sometimes, like literally, I really feel like I've done that. And so how am I going to do this? How can I explain what I do? And so if you're coming back next week, we're going to dive into that a little bit more, but really just thinking that effective and reflective practitioner, you're doing this anyway. It's just now giving it some formality to it.
And Jessica, I see some responses here. I see some advanced candidates. That's what we call ourselves when we didn't do it the first go round. We didn't meet the expectations the first go round. So we're going on with our journey. So I was an advanced candidate in a cohort of teachers at one school. So we helped each other by reading each other's entries. We helped each other by reading each other's standards and going through and making sure you highlight the things that you connect with. What I did is I read the standards, and when I thought I had it, I would highlight it. When I thought I didn't internalize it and had it in my entry, I would highlight it, like checking the box. That helped me internalize. It also helped me talk to other people about what they were doing. So we have a great opportunity with this technology now. You can reach out to somebody like me in Georgia. If you're in Arizona, you can reach out to somebody like me or Jessica via Zoom and get some feedback. We have networks all over the country with candidate support providers. So if you are alone, you don't have to be. I know that I was in a unique experience having a cohort of people to work with, but you don't have to be alone. And I hope I answered one of your questions. How do you internalize it? You, like she said, you rinse and wash and repeat.
Over and over again. I will say too, Heavenly, I know it's been really helpful. I wish I had more people outside of my district. I have done candidate support all over the state of Arizona, and it's really nice reading for a context that I don't know a lot about, because it has to be clear, consistent, and convincing for me to know what you're explaining, right? You know, handing it off to someone that doesn't know your context or your district or what you're up against. And if I, as a support provider, can read it and have clarity, that's clear, you know. That's where the good stuff is.
Yes. So I see our talented team answering a lot of the questions in the chat. But yes, you have to have a growth mindset and you have to have resilience, and just keep after it, and you will achieve it. You will achieve it because you'll begin to read the standards and see a reflection of yourself in the standards. And that's an exciting thing that happened to me. And I didn't think I was better off with the advanced candidate then, but I know I'm better off for being an advanced candidate now because it gave me more time to reflect and get better.
I think we can go on from that one, Lisa. I think that was I
think they got it.
They did.
So these are wonderful, beautiful core propositions. So I'm suspecting if you've already started with component 4, you have perused the core propositions. If you have not, it's the overarching idea for every component, and you need to see these 5 core propositions weaving through the fabric of your writing. Teachers are committed to students in their learning. So how am I showing that I'm committed to my students in their learning? What am I doing? Am I assessing them and seeing that, hey, the teacher next door had better scores than I did? And maybe I need some professional learning in making rubrics because my kids don't understand the rubric and they're not doing well. So I'm reflecting and I'm going to do what I need to do for my students. Proposition 2, teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those subjects to their students. So your content knowledge, do you study your content and find innovative ways to practice? I always love to challenge everyone to invest in culture and weave the culture of the students you see in your classroom into your teaching. So when I started a unit, I knew the cultures. I knew that I needed to respect all the holidays and the different diversity in my classroom. So we might talk about Ramadan. We may talk about the ways that we honor each other and where we're from and our geography of our people. So just think of those ways you not just know your subjects, you know how to reach and teach your kids. Proposition 3, teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring student learning. So that makes me go, this really rings out with component 4, doesn't it? I need to be able to assess my students and manage their learning based on their needs and monitor their learning. How am I showing in my writing and my video that I'm doing that? And then proposition 4, teachers think systematically about their practice and learn from experience. So, okay, we did not do well with that math task in this PLC. I'm going to pull my PLC together as a teacher leader, and we're going to read some Van der Waal because we all need some support. We don't need to pay anybody because we're awesome. And we're going to get a book and we're going to study and we're going to teach each other. And then proposition 5, teachers are members of learning communities. See how this all connects together? It's another helix. So we didn't know how to do something. I didn't stay alone and close my door and try to go through that Van der Waal book and learn math practice on my own. I created a learning community with my peers, and no principal or anybody had to tell us to do that, because we are accomplished and we're going to make our practice better. And we're even going to get our parents involved and learn with our community. So these are the stories that accomplished teachers tell every day, but we don't write it down and pat ourselves on the back and recognize. So this is the time where you say, I. Teachers never say I. We say we did it and they did. No, this is the time to reflect on your wondrous practice and tease it out into these propositions and these standards.
We actually, with a group of teachers that were willing, I used to do a lot of district professional development on social emotional learning and mindfulness. And we did that for teachers as well. It's a great mindful practice for yourself at the end of a day, at the end of a new lesson, at the end of a week, to just sit and, like Heavenly said, jot down and reflect. What went well? What's the fail forward approach here? Even if it failed theoretically, what do you need to treasure? What do you need to trash, right? You know, just as a habit of mindfulness, not all teachers, I just read in the chat, it feels boastful. Yes, it does. We're not used to talking ourselves up. We're really not. I mean, if something went really well in my head, I'm going, oh my gosh, it actually worked out really well, but I don't go tell anyone, right? You know, I just like, oh, I don't want to go brag to my person next door. I totally understand that. But jot that down, just that habit of reflection and mindfulness. I guarantee you 10 to 15 things a day you are doing are amazing, and no one will ever know them but you. And so keep your teacher fire going that way too. And then that also is helping you with your national boards. All of that reflection, all of that thought, being able to articulate that is evidence that you can use. All of that. You're doing it anyway.
If I could chime in here.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Heavenly.
No worries.
I was just going to say your comment about is resonating some in the chat and was also a theme on last night's webinar. And just wanted to share something that occurred to me as one of the presenters was sharing last night, is that oftentimes as teachers, we are humble and don't want to brag, and we kind of keep ourselves in our own place. But the important part about this is if you don't write it, the assessors don't know that it's happened. And so you also have, while you are doing this to center your practice and improve for students, it's also important to sort of lift up what you're doing and what you're learning and reflecting on.
Yes, I agreed. And it was so hard for me to say things about myself that I thought was boastful. That was a bridge I had to cross. And as a profession, we sometimes wonder why people don't hold us in high regard. We've got to brag about ourselves and the great things we do in our pedagogy. So now Richard Klein gets me to write articles as an accomplished teacher and submit them and talk about how great teachers are all the time. So that's the practice you do here will result in you just uplifting the profession and the public more. So get your bragging shoes on, so you can have bragging rights. Tom Brady and Gronk are talking about going to Disney World on TV right now. Why can't we brag about our profession?
I think too, what you said is so important, because of what Lisa was saying, how if you don't put it down, they don't know. And it wasn't until I was a new teacher mentor and coach. And so I got the privilege of being invited into 75 different classrooms every week for 4 years. And it was wonderful. I loved it. But I had no idea that not everyone taught like I did. That sounds really like a ridiculous statement, but I just had no idea the variety of teachers and strategies that were out there until I got to sit in K-12 classrooms. As a middle childhood generalist, I stuck to my sweet spot. But you might think this is routine. I do this all the time. National Board isn't to get you to reinvent your teaching. I mean, it's to refine what you're doing, but they're not looking for you to go out and create some new research-based strategy no one's ever heard of before. They're looking to you to measure what you're already doing against a set of standards and looking at, are those lining up? It doesn't mean throw out everything you've done and start anew and let's change everything I'm doing in my classroom. That's why reading those standards, Heavenly mentioned the standards, is so important, because in there for your certificate area are these little nuggets of examples. And when you read through those, think of which ones am I already doing? Which one, and Heavenly was talking about highlighting too. My highlights, I didn't even know they made highlighters in 6 colors, but they do, because I found them because I needed 6 colors. Just going through there and what am I already doing? Maybe I'm doing this, or, ooh, wow, I don't know if I'm doing that. And then that's where those little refinements and things start to come in. It's not like a formal observation. You know, I know we're not talking about the video, but I think it all goes together. It's just doing what you do and talking about it, reflecting about it, and measuring it up against those standards. And that's what this is. So when we look at this, this is a snippet from the level 4 rubric, and part of, we're going to give you a little bit of, I won't call it homework, but I don't know, a moving you forward task. Sometimes I got stuck a lot in my writing. I put it off to the side because I wasn't sure what to do next. I'm a very big procrastinator by nature. And I would just kind of like put it away and like, oh, I don't know, just to keep you moving forward. But these are the 3 big pieces of component 4. The first is developing knowledge of your students to inform instruction and assessments. And that's what Heavenly was kind of speaking to. We have to show some type of collaboration to meet a student need. And I know I saw a couple of questions about collaboration in the chat. They're kind of going fast and I'm trying to pay attention to both, but we're going to talk about that right now for just a second. And that reflection is all throughout, reflecting on and meeting a professional learning need. And they're kind of all a little overarching there. They do not have to all be about the same thing. That's a question we get sometimes. However, they could be. So we'll just kind of give you a few examples of that. But in the rubric, it says provides clear, consistent, convincing. Those are words. I think we had our candidates make posters of those in my small group. Evidence. The teacher develops and uses a knowledge of children gathered from multiple sources to inform instruction and assessment, reflect on his or her own practice, collaborate with families and caregivers, the community, colleagues, and others to create improvements that advance children's learning and growth. Okay, so looking at that just a little deeper, I think the next, now we're gonna think for a minute about professional learning need. Okay, so we have lots of professional learning experiences. So I want you to just take a moment, and you feel free, you can drop them in the chat. You can just use your note catcher. You can, however public or private you'd like to be on this. Which professional learning experiences have you participated in recently? That language is intentional. A professional learning experience, the definition of that is up to you. I got a lot of questions on, does this count? Does this count? Is this what they mean? Can I use this? Did it move your practice forward? Did it impact your students? So those follow-up questions, how did the professional learning, so first make that list, just 1, 2, 3 things. Heavenly mentioned a PLC group. Maybe that's a formal one. Maybe that's trusted colleagues that you just gather up and somehow you all seem to gravitate towards each other. It doesn't have to be a formal assignment. It can just be like-minded people, that you collaborate with. And then think about, how did that learning impact your practice? And probably even equally important or more important, how did that learning impact your students? And that's the bridge that can get interesting, right? You know, that's the articulation where I got stuck a ton. I don't know, it just did. Well, how do you know? Because I saw students do this. Well, what was this? What was this that they were doing? And it's like your inner 4-year-old comes out. Why? How? All those one-word questions. And my coach would just keep asking those. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know any of these answers. It looked like they did, you know. I don't know about you, Heavenly, but it got frustrating for me. Not because it didn't happen, but because it was really a struggle to articulate that. So that's what these guiding questions are, to get you to think through. And if you think of a professional learning experience and it becomes a little bit difficult to answer those questions, then you have to consider, does that fit this best then? You know, you want to provide the best evidence. I guarantee you have a professional learning experience weekly, probably, if not even more so, more often. It could be a big professional development session. You know, it could be a training you attend or something like that. It might not be. It might be a conversation with a team that's super informal, but completely changed the way you looked at things. I think, Heavenly, you gave really good examples of that just earlier. Getting your team together, looking at that math, you know, all of that is a professional learning experience. So that definition, again, think bigger. When we say professional learning community, or when you read that in the boards, you think, oh, my PLC group, if you happen to have one. It can be that. It's not limited to that. And that can be the beauty of it for some people. You have to be able to articulate how this was a professional learning experience, how it impacted you, and then in turn impacted your students. And then what evidence do you have to show that that happened? Okay, and I know it's a lot of information. Heavenly, do you have anything else there?
So I'm thinking about the root causes, you know, all these things you hear in your PLC, and you're like, we're going to talk about root cause. Oh, we're going to talk about this. But really, what was the trigger to make you want to learn something? Did you have to sit in it, but it changed your life? Did you have to go to the sit and get, but at the end of the day, when you found out about number talks, you went back and you implemented it and you saw a difference in your kids that weren't learning before? And you have to really unpack your story. You really
Absolutely.
have to unpack that story. That's why it's so hard to stay in under that page number. That's the hardest thing to do when you usually struggle with writing. If you start to unpack the story and connect it to these standards, you're going to begin to have to edit it down.
Clear,
and make sure
consistent, convincing.
clear and consistent. And you stay with the rubric. But collaboration professionally to meet the needs of your students. And when you think of collaboration, you learn something, you help your students with it, but you also might bring your families in. You might have a math night where you show your parents that numeracy. There's just all these kinds of ways I know teachers do things, and I see you tweeting about it. And I go in classrooms, so I see it happening all the time. But do we reflect on it and say, I did it, and I thought, and give yourselves credit and actually write what you did on paper?
Yeah, because I know, so we use a STEM, because I know I do, which impacts student learning by. So because I know, or because I learned, right? In this case, professional learning, I did blank, which impacts student learning. How? It's that sentence frame, well, at least for us, over and over and over again. And exactly what you said, that collaboration piece, who else might you need? So I'll just tell you a quick story. When I was doing my boards, I had a 5th grade student, I'm MC Gen, so ages 7 to 12, that was reading at 28 words per minute. Now I'll tell you, an average 5th grader should be well over 100 words per minute. Okay, so this was a need. I am not a primary teacher. bless all of you EC gents, because it is not in my purview to do the small ones. So I applaud all of you. Your jobs are amazing. I didn't have the skills to teach a student how to read well. I mean, I knew the basics of phonics and things, but what this student needed, I did not have. So I had to go seek out some people, my reading interventionist, my Title I person. I needed to advocate to my administration. I need some training on this. I need to help this student, right? And so it just happened to work out that in that case, I had a single student, not even students plural, but this was a need that I had to meet. You know, I couldn't in good conscience just go, well, yes, I'm pulling in for guided reading. I'm doing all the things, but I knew this student needed more. And I knew that I was not best equipped at that time to give it to him. And so that was, you know, a need that just arose, right? Heavenly kind of just said that you'll know when there's something you need. And gosh, what's happened since March of last year till now that have caused us all to meet some new needs here? I mean, if there's any, I know it seems scary to add a component or do component for this year, but this year, my goodness, y'all, you learned so many new things. How many people have you collaborated and leaned on this year? Probably even more. As disconnected as we may be physically, how connected have we become in other ways? How many new things have you learned that impacted your students?
Yes, and they're doing amazing things to help their families get in school, get involved in school, get devices to families. I've heard of teachers going to stores and all kinds of things, getting the community involved with donations. We know you're doing this work, and what an opportunity to put this down for everyone to have an artifact of what you did. Because I go through the teaching profession I went through so quickly, and you forget about things you did. And my daughter pulled out a portfolio. I've forgotten I'd done so many things. I've forgotten about the gardening and the butterflies with my students. This gives you a historical artifact to remember the work that you've done, because we're so involved in our Helix, spinning and churning all the time. We forget to document our accomplishments. And this is an opportunity for you to document how you saw a student need. It could be about, you know, you can talk about maybe one student that you highlighted and you personalize the learning for that student, or it could be a group of students. Your standards tell you the population to focus on. And then you got this written commentary that tells a story of how you had a student need, a professional learning need, and what assessment you used to find out what the need was, or to see what impact you made with that. Maybe you thought the professional learning need made an impact and it really didn't. It's okay to tell the story of failure.
I love that, because so many people, you know, unlike sometimes districts will say, we're trying to hit this benchmark, you know, it's very hard SMART goals. Not that SMART goals are bad. I mean, there's definitely measurable, attainable goals, but this is a reflective process. National board isn't going to say, oh, well, they gave that assessment again and the kids only scored a 70, so they must not be an accomplished teacher. That is not what this is. This is, oh, my kid scored a 70. Here's what I'm going to do next. Okay, now I know what's next. So in thinking about that, you know, this is kind of just weaving that together, like Heavenly said, you know, you're stuck in that helix. Don't forget what standards your specific certificate area is focusing on, because that might help you narrow down what professional learning needs also are shown within that standard, right? What student needs are best featured, you know, which you're trying to show evidence of those standards. So you kind of just want to it's very piecemeal, and like Heavenly, I had to print everything. I'm also old school. I just like paper. I still read paper books too. I own a Kindle, but give me a bookmark. I'm just that way. And then that bottom circle is group profile, instructional context. Those are all your forms and all your artifacts, your evidences that you'll submit. And so just remember though, that your writing is scored and your artifacts and evidences are there to back up your writing. Okay. It still really has to be in the writing. If you're attaching this document or this assessment or this thing, you need to let the assessors know what of that they're going to read it. Of course, they're going to look at it, but you need to tell them what they're reading for, what they're looking for, right? And so just being super articulate on what exactly in that evidence of professional learning need you took and helped students with, you know, just as concisely and as clearly as you can. And that might take a few reads. Go ahead. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead. I know we're running out of time. Heavenly and I could do this all night.
Yes, and we just have like 8 more minutes. Lisa gave us our time check. So we have some links for you that you can peruse on your own, and they're going to help you reflect and unpack these things and have some aha moments. So in the assessment resources, there's an article from Edutopia, a link that really unpacks some different ways to assess your students, just ideas, nothing you have to do. And there is also an organizer for organizing your professional learning community, and an article from Edutopia. Edutopia does some great articles. They're easy reads, quick and easy. It's not going to take forever but those articles are something that you can unpack in your PLC too. So as you're thinking about your learning here, how could you unpack that learning in your PLC? To start time stamping what you do and develop a timeline of your thoughts and just start reflecting on everything you do. And then we have a link about digital assessments. There's another group of Edutopia articles about digital learning and digital assessments that have come out of this situation that we're in. And you can think about how you're already using some of these things in your digital classroom. How are you doing synchronous learning with your students? Are you doing asynchronous learning? Things that you would talk about in your commentary, unpack for people because they don't know you. You tell your students you got to put your name on your paper because I'm not going to know who you are. Your name's not going to be on this paper. You're going to have to paint a picture of what's going on with your words. So it's very important to unpack your practice and be able to articulate that and celebrate your great teaching. Five more minutes. Oh, what types of assessments will guide your analysis? And what will you do to improve student learning? These are the kinds of reflexive questions you'll ask yourself. Did I say reflexes or reflective? It's getting late on the East Coast. How will you meet the
probably
needs?
both. They're probably reflexive after a while. It's all right.
How will you collaborate with your community? So think about this continuum of analyzing student learning needs, analyzing professional learning needs, analyzing community involvement, and developing student learning goals. Think about how all those things intertwine in its own little helix and how that intertwines with your core propositions, your standards, and your rubric. So I know we gave you a lot to unpack, but guess what? We get to see you again.
Yay. Hopefully that's a yay. That's a yay for me.
Yay.
I love working with Heavenly and Lisa and Richard and everybody at National Boards. Welcome. You are already in the National Board family. If you are here, you're in. Sorry, you're not getting rid of us. We're going to keep showing up for you as much as possible.
So we're going to come back again, and we want you to think about some things. Why might component 4 be a helpful component to work on during the pandemic? Gave you some hints there. What advice do you have for educators working on component 4 during the pandemic? Those are our discussion questions.
And we have like 2 minutes to discuss, but
we kind of went there with you a little early, so I think
we knew what was coming.
We knew it was coming, so we can postpone it for you next time. So this is the homework for the next component 4 webinar. You're going to start to unpack your standards. You've all heard that before. Deconstruct those standards. Look at your prompts and your rubric. And it just, you don't have to put it on a grid. You can put it on the bulletin board in your classroom, on your room. If you're a whiteboard user or a Jamboard user, you can put it on a Jamboard. Think of where you can keep this, where you can reflect back on it and see it in one snapshot, because it's a lot of paper.
It is.
Do you want to make note cards with those different themes so you can connect them? Think about where you're going to house this. This graphic organizer might not work for you, but you might like big chart paper somewhere in your house.
I'm just going to quick interrupt you. In the chat, it said, what do you mean by prompts? Yes, from the written commentary. So that is just, it's super basic organizer. It's pretty generic. It would honestly work for all of your components. This is not just specific to component 4, but when you can kind of see how they connect together a little bit, or maybe you can match a standard in the rubric, and maybe you're not sure what prompts go in there, but it's just a different way to get you thinking about that alignment, because I did get lost in that personally as I was writing. I'm just telling the story and I would kind of lose sight of some of those things. So this is just to keep it in the forefront of your mind.
Yeah. I was going to jump in that this is probably the simplest graphic organizer you're going to see connected to National Board, and potentially one of the most helpful ones, because one of the things that all of us on our National Board journey struggle with is making the connections between the pieces, right? Each component has a couple of key standards. So what are the key standards for component 4 for you? Then reading the prompts. What prompts are aligned to what standard? And then when you go to the rubric, what parts of the rubric connect then to that prompt and